Going once, going twice. Sold.
Oh, let's see. I bought a skinny sliver of land in Little Rock prior to signing up for membership. I don't want to stop paying property taxes because I could potentially be disqualified. Oh no. Okay. So, you don't actually, you don't have to worry about that. If you bought all counties, at least lots of counties, have useless junk land that rolls through their inventory every year almost, and it's because it's there. It has property taxes that are assessed against every year, but it's not usable for any purpose. And so people will just basically end up not paying the property taxes on it and letting it go to foreclosure. When the county warns you about not being able to
He is
participate
right about that, though.
in future sales.
Yeah, if he goes delinquent on that, then he won't be able to participate because it's statewide. It's not just county in Arkansas. So like if you didn't pay your property taxes and your property goes to the tax sale, it's going to disqualify him from bidding on other properties because he has a property that's gone through the tax sale or is delinquent on taxes. That's one of the things that you can't have when they have you sign it.
Oh,
You know how
that's
they have
right.
you sign.
That's
So
right. They do have their little waiver there for the year. And
yeah,
so yeah, that is possible. That is a possibility. Uh
what
yeah,
I
so,
would recommend you do is try to sell it, to one of the neighbors, even if you didn't make a lot of money off of it. If you want to get rid of it, I don't know what the property tax is on it, or you could, try to sell it for really cheap on an auction site and just get rid of it. But other than that, you are going to have to probably pay property taxes on it. So if you want to bid in future auctions there.
yeah, unless you could bid under another name, unless you start a business entity or something like that, if you bought it under your own name.
Yeah, you might be able to do that.
But yeah, that is kind of a pain, and it's kind of a dumb rule. I mean, I can see why they do that, but they've got so much junk land there that it, it's hard to have that apply because that would only make sense if every single piece of property made sense to pay property taxes on it, and it's just not the case. Because useless or worthless land is probably one of the biggest risks that investors face. I mean, uh, you know, when properties are divided up, when developing is happening, there's always going to be pieces that are just left over that don't quite fit or aren't a full lot. You're always going to have leftover bits and pieces. You're always going to have skinny side lots or areas where land uh, where the property is going to have some kind of value attached to it, but it can't be used for anything. That's the real issue with a lot of these properties, is that there's no real world value because they're difficult to sell. You couldn't really turn around and sell the property either, which is again one of the reasons why it doesn't really have a lot of real world value. And so these are all challenging things to deal with, I think, with those properties, because the property taxes they ask for annually might also be one of the contributing factors. Sometimes the amount that they're trying to charge for these useless pieces of property drive people to abandon them because it's a racket. I mean, it's like they're charging you a lot of money for a property that you don't get anything good out of, essentially. So it forces people to abandon properties in a lot of cases, I think.
Yeah, well, we have it the number one risk. It's so important, and that's part of the reason why, even if it looks buildable, we're always checking the zoning. In fact, I tell this story all the time, but it happens all the time that we go to auctions where, in fact, this year, Shade went to the auction with some of our students in Little Rock, and we had done our due diligence, and North Little Rock had changed their law within the city where you have to have a 7,000 foot building lot to be a buildable lot. And we'd gone through and checked them all. We knew that these weren't buildable lots, but it was interesting for our students to be able to see people bidding on these lots, thinking that they were buildable lots, and had not done the research to determine that none of them were buildable. So they were paying, and bidding aggressively on these lots that were essentially junk lot, even though it looked buildable, even though it was the same size of lots as other lots that had homes on the area. They had changed their laws. So when we're talking about something like that, it really just becomes a side lot, even though in the past it used to be a buildable lot.
Yeah, the same thing happens when we find liens against properties. We'll always know about liens that are on, or against properties that are in the auction. And so as those properties come up and are sold, we can tell whether the people that are bidding on them know about the liens or don't know about the liens. You can always tell when they don't know, especially if it's a large lien. If it's a large lien, I mean, there are plenty of liens out there where they might totally wreck the deal. They'll turn it, they'll basically make it so that it's a non-starter for us, and we'll watch people bid on it and sometimes bid those properties up where they obviously have no idea, that there are giant liens against properties. But in the same way, they don't always know that there's giant liens. They also may not know that a property is not usable. That's something that that people get caught doing all the time. It's just assuming that that a lot is going to be usable, or that it's going to, they can turn around and sell it for something, when in reality, if it doesn't qualify for building, it's going to be you're going to have a hard time selling it. And so that's one way that you can avoid that, is just to stick to properties that are always usable, buildable properties, and you won't have to deal with any of these other types of useless property.
Yeah, we're going to usually avoid any type of landlocked property, anything that looks like it's swamp or wetlands, thin strips of land, obviously, and also roads. In most cases, you're going to want to avoid any type of road. In fact, we did have one student that years ago ended up buying a road in an exclusive neighborhood in San Francisco, and it ended up ended up being a big deal where they had to go ahead and buy the property from her. But in most cases, you're going to, you try to buy roads or anything like that, you're going to be out of luck. So we stick with property that are buildable and usable. You always hear us say the property has to have use and value. And so, even those lots that used to be buildable lots that are no longer, the only thing that can be really used is a side lot. In fact, I think it's actually a disservice to the community. They're doing it because they think it's going to bring up their property values, but in a lot of ways, it's going to actually lower their property values, and it's going to give them a ton of work, because they're going to have to go out there and maintain these properties, that